where one person would stand on one side and one person would stand on another and report what they saw, and then they would switch, and then they would realize, oh, my beloved is actually looking at something else. That person's perspective is literally not mine. There is factual evidence for that point of view. I have always found this very instructive, and I bring it here today as a concrete part of the talk I'd like to give, which is informal, but I have some ideas to share. My two perspectives are as an administrator and as a faculty member in German. And I care passionately about both perspectives. I think we all care passionately about teaching and learning German. And I think we need institutions to be able to do that. And the field of German studies has clearly grown, and it is connected in very concrete, very fascinating, vibrant ways with a lot of other fields. It is rarely an insular program, and that is important. It needs to continue to link and grow and to understand itself as part of a larger whole in higher education. And in particular, German departments need to look at themselves in perspective of their whole institutions. This is not necessarily an antagonistic relationship, though it very often expresses itself that way. I'd like to trouble that us-them thinking and ask that German colleagues who are finding themselves greatly challenged in terms of staffing to look very closely at the narratives we're telling ourselves, and to look very closely at how German functions in higher education, in the liberal arts, and in the humanities as a whole. Aware of our moment and our challenges and our stressors, I wanted to share some bright spots that are happening at my institution, and also share some ways in which other institutions could benefit from things that are going well. And I think that's one of the things we need to do, is we need to work together and collaborate as much as possible. Oberlin, a few years ago, launched more than a strategic initiative, a strategic campaign. It launched an extraordinary self-study that took into account the $9 million structural deficit of the college. And it announced to the college, to the faculty, to the alums, we've got this structural deficit. If we continue, we're going to have a $20 million structural deficit in just a few years. We had a new president join us at that time, and a remarkable educator and remarkable leader. One of the ideas she floated was to certainly use data to understand the reality of our institution, and possibly to bring in consultants to tell us where we are generating revenue, where we are not generating revenue, and what might need to be jettisoned. The faculty and the administration said no thank you to that idea. They decided, though, to say we definitely need to know the facts. So yes, we'll take the idea of learning with the support of consultants, learning how to understand figures, dollars, enrollments, trends, and we'll take this on ourselves. Oberlin initiated the most transparent, the most comprehensive self-examination and exploration I think I've ever seen, and I think most people have also ever seen. We were very public about it and put a lot of our information out on a website. I'm going to link two things for you right now in the chat. Sorry. One is the public report, and I'll explain why I'm telling you this in just a moment, what its connection to German is. It's the Academic and Administrative Program Review. Mm-hmm. We did this in full awareness of our financial troubles, and we also did this in full awareness of what we expected in 2024 Many of you know we're going to have changes in demographics, and in the year 2024, there will be what's called a cliff. The number of high school students who are coming to college will drop precipitously. Our model, many models for higher education are based heavily on student tuition dollars. This is not a secret. And so if there are fewer, we will be competing more heavily. And what will we do if not as many can come or can afford, in my case, a very high priced tuition? So we were looking very closely at what Oberlin needs to do to sustain the institution. We concluded heartily, we are not changing our mission. We are a liberal arts college. The languages, literature, art, music, philosophy, science, they work together. They go hand in hand at a liberal arts college. We are not going to jettison our core values. We are not going to stop offering financial aid. We are not going to cut whole programs based on the number of dollars they bring in. For example, if a German department brings in 8 majors, that doesn't sound like it competes really with the chemistry department or even with the dance department or with the theater department that brings in many more. Oberlin didn't do that. It said, what are our students really looking for? What do they really need in higher education? How can we take seriously new needs for deep education in the liberal arts? And so we have been concertedly transforming our education in order to answer the needs without letting go of our values. We're doing some different things, but we're also asking, what is it of our histories and our traditions that we need to hold on to? I'm going to put something else in the chat. And this is where I'm really nervous in speaking to my former professors. It's a piece of my own writing that's on a website, and it deals with Oberlin and the critical role that Oberlin himself plays in one of German literature's foundational canonical texts, Lenz. I teach Lenz in a number of different classes, both in German and in English, and often in both. Here's a short essay I wrote for our blog, and it talks about some new ways we can use a text like this to educate ourselves, educate our students, and think about what to do with the knowledge that such a text engenders in us. So it's a different kind of approach to studying a text. It says, let's go out into the world now and respond to that text. And that, I believe, is a really important, possible, viable change that can help to bring in some more students. Enrollments are a big issue. They are really important, both from a faculty perspective and from an administrator's perspective. We really do need to see how many people are in a class so that we can provide the appropriate level of staffing. I want to share ways in which people could look beyond and look at the institution as a whole. An example at Oberlin, a few years ago, professors in German and in French and in Russian advocated strongly and passionately and publicly for more Arabic on our campus. That was really important. That's morally right. That is intellectually sound. And our 2 faculty governance committees that weigh such requests voted in favor of supporting this. And now in this current year, the same sort of requests are being made, and these 4 languages appear in one framing to be competing with each other. How in the world are we going to choose? Is it German or is it Arabic? Is it Russian or is it French? Faculty need to come together and talk about this. They need to come together and say, what is the role of language, literature, culture in our world, in our college, and what can we do about it? I'd like to suggest that a meeting such as today's can help us take that impossible choice out of our individual colleges and universities and expand it more broadly, and that we could collaborate more effectively. I'm looking right at Gabriele Dillmann, whose work is prescient. She, years ago, introduced sharing courses, sharing languages. Ohio State University does an extraordinary job with technology as well, and sharing instruction across institutional borders. A few years ago, one of the reasons people weren't so sure that a shared languages program could work, where we teach one course at my institution, another course at yours, was because they thought something like Zoom, that's not a legitimate platform. We can't teach that way. We can't possibly have class over a distance. Well, it turns out we can. And I am so sorry. I would give everything not to have had the coronavirus. But now that we have had it and we have all tasted Zoom, we should use it. We should continue to use it to grow our programs. And so change the calculus, because in a zero-sum game, the small departments are going to continue to struggle. That's a fact. If we expand in some creative ways, they can all help one another and lift one another up. I've floated ideas like elastic teaching loads, whereby faculty members aren't assigned simply 5 courses per year, that's the teaching load at Oberlin, but perhaps a number of students per year. That might be a way to rebalance and maintain positions in which there's a 3rd year or a 4th year German class that has 4 students in it. Those 4 students need and love and crave that class, and they're getting outstanding educations from all of us who teach at that level, but they're very small, and we're all nervous about whether we can sustain that program. Could we share better? I believe we could. Whether it's units, whether it's whole courses, I think we can come together and work and develop a larger curriculum in our consortia, in our region, certainly in our state. One outcome of today's meeting could be a commitment that we actually share enrollment data with each other. And we say, are there ways in which we might partner and connect some of our courses or trade off some of our courses? It's complicated. It takes a lot of work. Gabriele will be the first to tell you it's hard work, and very few people will say thank you very publicly. Gabriele, thank you for the work that you have done, because you laid a foundation.
Thank
You're
you very
welcome.
much.
You are welcome, and I mean it sincerely. This is the kind of idea that I think can help us in our programs. I think really we have enormous challenges, but I also think truly a group like this has the solutions, and talking and challenging our own narratives and deciding to be problem solvers, creative problem solvers, will be the way that we strengthen our programs. They are vital. We must never forfeit or relinquish the vision of the humanities, of the languages, of literatures, of cultural studies in our world. They are vital. We need to explain why, not only to administrators, but also to students. They need to understand. So that's the kind of a reason behind my sharing that Oberlin Lenz article with you. Reframe some things and see if we can't change the narrative by changing the actual details that describe our programs. I think I'll close there.
Bravo. Thank you personally too. Thank you so much. You make me cry. It's heartbreaking. So thank you, Elizabeth. That was very, very deep. Thank you. Let's, like we said, let's move on to our second and then third presenter, and then have the discussion for all 3, please. So Evan Torner is at the University of Cincinnati. His talk is titled Challenges and Opportunities in the UC German Undergraduate Program. Uh, Evan was very modest about his bio, so it's going to be very quick. He's a PhD from UMass at Amherst. He's an associate professor of German studies at University of Cincinnati and serves there as undergraduate director of German studies and director of the UC Game Lab. And Evan, you'll probably just quickly tell us a couple things what that is. Not everyone may know what the UC Game Lab is.
Sure. Thank you, Gabriella, for moderating. Thank you, Bob, and Natasha for getting us all together, even virtually, and also thank my colleagues who came out to hear me represent or misrepresent our department in these times. If you were interested in what the UC Game Lab is, it's a what I call a collection of materials and events to facilitate game-based learning and research at the University of Cincinnati. I came from a game design community in Western Massachusetts, and I brought that with me to this job when I took it in 2014, and that has allowed me to connect to all corners of the university, no matter how obscure, with everything from VR activities to actually outreach sort of game design and game analysis workshops I hold for high school students, and just sort of problem solving. So someone will say, I want to teach Jewish medieval law, is there a game for that? And I say, yes, there is. It's called Order in the Court, and we can buy copies for you and run it. And we're running a papal election game for the history department, a 6-week workshop for a local high school, again, on sort of the basics of game design. And I regularly have students, play things that they never otherwise would play. That is a massive side tangent, but it is one of the things I do and enjoy doing here at the University of Cincinnati. I'm actually, for a presentation today, I will be talking extemporaneously as well as reading from a script. And the script is because I'm talking from two positions. One is my own, and the other is from our coordinator of basic languages, Dr. Lindsay Presso, who's on the call, and who also, we couldn't do any of this without her tireless efforts. So I'm going to initially read her statement on how the basic languages are going during COVID, and then I'm going to talk about our own challenges at the undergraduate program, primarily focusing on electives as well as upper level courses, and our sort of restructuring, again, facing the same kinds of challenges that Elizabeth has already mentioned. So Dr. Presso writes, for the 2020 to 2021 academic year, University of Cincinnati is offering all basic German language courses fully online. The major obstacle in the pivot to online teaching was providing students with speaking practice. This was particularly the case for the asynchronous language courses that our college encourages us to offer in order to promote enrollment. Many of our colleagues in other language departments at other local institutions have turned to the services of companies such as Lingua Meeting and Talk Abroad. These platforms charge students as little as $10 per 30-minute session for one-on-one access to native speaker partners, or coaches, in quotes, who for most languages are located in countries that are in the global south. Our own concerns and the concerns of our teaching assistantships surrounding this outsourcing of academic labor pushed us to explore other options. In the end, we decided that rather than scrambling for non-ideal solutions to this problem, we would instead temporarily rework our curriculum to take advantage of the opportunities that the online format offers for teaching accelerated literacy skills. We have replaced all traditional exams with carefully scaffolded project-based assessments to assess reading, writing, and listening and planned speech. And our students do still practice speaking in our courses by submitting recordings. However, we have chosen to simply recognize that our online offerings will not be able to give the students the same practice with spontaneous speech as our previous hybrid and in-person courses. And of course, hybrid means they're mostly online, but do have some in-person instruction. And we will accordingly need to put a particular emphasis on spontaneous speaking in our curriculum once students eventually return to in-person classes. So that's us at the basic languages level. At the graduate level, or sorry, undergraduate level, I've been undergraduate director since 2016. I inherited the position from a titan in German studies in Ohio, Jennifer Kelly. Dr. Jennifer Kelly built this program into, again, a heavyweight and oversaw many many degree recipients who have gone on to great things, but also was a someone who could recruit majors and minors so well that when I took the position, I was about ready to faint. How many majors we had. Today's numbers are more modest. We have 11 majors and 37 minors. Now, how do you get 37 minors? Well, that's part of the discussion today. Is we are a program that you definitely minor in, and is that our future? Who knows? At the University of Cincinnati, we offer a full suite of basic languages taught by both faculty, Dr. Perceau, as well as our graduate master's and PhD students. We offer electives in English, with our most popular offerings being our fairy tales course, partially innovated by Sarah Friedrichsmeyer in the 90s, and Nazis in Cinema. Which is developed by Valerie Weinstein and then taken over by Tanya Nusser, and going in different directions, based on their own interests. Then we have our third year, right, full 2 semesters, advanced German, called Intro to German Studies, where we still do what I call grammar triage, but then move in and discuss a topic of our own interest. And then we still offer the survey of German literature, which again, we have refigured the canon. It's not the 1980s anymore. So we refigured the canon around, I think, more feminist, inclusive issues. But that is 1 semester of, again, 1750 to the present. And we apologize always at the beginning of that course for the whirlwind nature. And then we have a senior capstone, where they write a final paper that then is taken as a success in the program. One of the ways in which we get so many minors is something called the ICP program, the International Co-op program, which allows engineers to take summer courses and fall courses in German with us. And this was, of course, innovated by Richard Schade about 27, 28 years ago now. So this plan of study has them take courses basically through the summer and fall, and then they go and work a co-op internship at a German engineering firm such as Siemens or ThyssenKrupp for 6 to 8 months. They come back pretty much fluent or very, very close to C1, and are ready then to complete the minor, at which point we're basically offering them another year of advanced German, like I said, with that mix of grammar support plus topics. And then they take an elective, and then they'll take another elective with an independent study. And what that is we have English electives that then have study sections that are in German with the faculty. We're so small that it's not a really big burden to have faculty who then take the time aside to really do a proper German section. So we're not offering German language only sections to students. And this is based off of other models that we've seen successful elsewhere in the country. If you're majoring in German, you've got 2 years of advance, like that full program with the survey course and capstone included, a few more electives, and the independent study. So our situation is, of course, that we have shrank the upper level to a manageable size and basically made the minor a total of 4 courses beyond that basic language sequence, because we feel that educationally they're going to get so much from being abroad in the co-op and working in a real workplace auf Deutsch that there's nothing that we're going to contribute beyond that. And so part of what we do is value their own experiences, in a meaningful way, in terms of credits and other forces, as well as kind of get out of the way, because engineers, chemists, biology, organic chemists, and that sort of thing, they all have too many classes, too many labs, and we're always in the way. So part of our curriculum, even though it is humbling to do this, is to try to get out of the way, so that then they can take all these other demanding courses. Of course, we are in this weird position where we're both communicated to that, you know, German is not that necessary. I mean, really, come on. And also way too hard for the engineers. So this the dual messaging of being both too easy or not necessary and too hard is always, I mean, maybe it's been eternal with German studies, but definitely has enhanced itself during the last decade or so. I would say as a college, we've only been lightly hit by COVID. We have a strong regional turnout. And so we're only down, say, about 1% in enrollment, which is still a cut. And we have gone through budget cuts. But as a regional public university, we are people's fallback point. People transfer to us from more expensive colleges, and we are affordable in that respect. Our challenges, of course, is to deliver the kinds of education that they're still paying for. We don't want to fall into a trap where we can just expect students to come, especially given the demographic info that has been conveyed in Elizabeth's presentation. When I took the job in 2016 as undergraduate director, what I did discover was a disturbing level of inter-college, and inter-university competition. And by college, I mean our College of Arts and Sciences in the university. And then inter-college, I mean between all the other, we have a Conservatory of Music, a design arts program. And I found that although the faculty we talk across disciplines all the time and meet quite a bit, and especially the German department is very well networked across the university. When it came down to students, there was lots of, you know, since enrollments are key, everybody is always looking to get, you know, enrollments in their programs, which again, as a junior faculty member, I was kind of shocked by the way in which there was a lot of territory seeking. And the solution that we, of course, had in the 90s was, well, let's offer these big fairy tale courses and draw in lots of undergraduates who will then justify the existence of our smaller seminars. Except now everybody has the equivalent of a fairy tales course. So now that idea of, oh, we'll just develop another large English language enrollment course that will bring in all the business majors is not necessarily the solution. Or maybe it is. Maybe, in fact, innovation of courses is a problem because the advising office will have a decades-old document that says, oh, here are the German courses that you should have them take if they don't want to clear a major requirement or a language requirement. And these kinds of advising documents actually mean that I have to lobby the advising office fairly heavily so that they have accurate information about our program. In fact, advising and admissions are our main messaging points rather than our website or any other organ through which the students will get information. The main message I've been sending to advising is, please have the students email me. I'd love to chat with them. Lindsay would love to chat with them. Let's chat. And then we get into conversation, and soon we have a minor or a major on our hands. But advising has such high turnover that we have to continue to lobby them to make sure that the messaging is right, so that our curriculum is framed correctly, since even though it's small and compact and getting out of the way, it's also confusing to people who see their education as this linear path. So I also am sitting on a committee that's trying to envision the future of the college, called the 21st Century Futures Working Group. And we are mostly talking about this idea of siloization, that everyone has their individual departments, that we're all fighting for, you know, this limited number of students, and that we could be collaborating, but we're not. What's going on? I think a lot of the obstacle, right? So one way to remove the obstacles would be to totally restructure and say, no, the German department, which also has 11 programs in it, Todd can tell you about that. We have European Studies, Russian, Japanese language, Asian Studies, Film and Media Studies, and now the Digital Media Collaborative, all out of the German department. It's kind of strange arrangement, but we make it work. We teach across these multiple programs, and we are happy to do that. So we feel very de-siloed. We are often in dialogue with everybody else from the college, and we have done that work. But we're still at a point where we're still too small for the university to be comfortable. We need to restructure, and everybody has trauma from previous restructuring or previous moves, and is quite concerned about that. So that's a challenge that we're facing, is how can we get people to accept this interdisciplinarity that for us in German studies has become an accepted way of life, you know, for the past decade. But others don't see it that way and are still very cloistered. Another is that if you say, okay, well, if you want to hire in Arabic and German, just make a cluster hire in Arabic German, and then they'll do both. The cluster hire thing works unless they run off and join one program or the other, which actually is what happens. And so we have we were a bit more jaded now about these sort of ambitious cluster hires around themes and topics that administrators often pitch and say, hey, this is going to be the solution to your problems, because ultimately, you know, there will be two departments, two different sets of drama, and which drama do you choose? Eventually, you'll pick one or the other. And, you know, and rather than seeing these as like, you know, we can't overcome this obstacle, it's immovable. We say this is one thing that happens when you make a cluster hire or when you propose a restructuring for a department. And so I see ourselves now in the midst of the crisis as being very well positioned, you know, online with our platforms and with enthusiastic students in numbers. But from an administrative point of view, we're still too small. We're kind of weird, and we need to you know, figure out where we fit in a larger program, especially if the messaging about what we do is going to get through to people, and so that the students aren't just coming and sending me emails. And I think I'm going to stop there, but I appreciate the opportunity to just be able to speak about these things and can go into any details further. And Dr. Prisso and Dr. Herzog are also on the call and can clarify things that I might have said or misrepresented.
Thank you so very much, Evan. Very interesting facts you shared with us. Can we applaud? Thank you very much. And like you said, we'll pick up on some extra points during the discussion. Our next presenter is Christy Völl from Bowling Green State University. The title of her presentation is German Education in the Age of Coronavirus, Online Teaching and Study Abroad. She has since expanded her talk to include a topical focus, the wave of restructuring and firings of faculty resulting from the pandemic and how we can take a proactive approach. I took that directly from her email. I hope that's okay with you, Christy, and included it in her title because it is so telling. That also caused us to realign our talks because that goes very well with the previous presenters. Okay, very well. Christy is Associate Professor of German at Bowling Green State University, where she has served as Director of the Salzburg Year Abroad program on multiple occasions, as well as having directed the International Studies major for a decade. Christy, I hand the floor over to you, or the screen, I guess we call it now.
Yes, thank you, Gabby. I will send you in the chat a link to our Salzburg program website, and I'm going to just screen share it up here just so you don't have to look at me while I'm speaking. We have had Glück im Unglück with our program in particular. The Unglück was that last year we had identified someone to run this program on site, and literally one day after we sent that request in, everything closed down for coronavirus and the position was put on hold, and ultimately the search was crashed. But the good news, the Glück im Unglück, is that we have been encouraged to repropose. I mean, the bad news, of course, is great. We get to go through the whole thing again, the proposal, the search. But, you know, I think we can be very grateful that our program has not, at least so far, been on the chopping block. I mean, I'm sure you're all aware that this year there is no study abroad. Right? There's been some strange attempts at online approximation of virtual study abroad, and I gather that actually OSU is doing something very interesting in that regard that I don't that I don't know the details of. But I can say that in the International Studies program, where there is also a study abroad requirement, for students who need to graduate and truly can't fulfill that requirement, rather than just saying, okay, you don't have to do it, we are encouraging them to do internships that can be done either locally or virtually, but have an international component so that at least they get the experiential basis of this. So I will come back to talk about study abroad, and I'm sure that all of us have things to add about that. But what I would like to do now is, sorry, I am fiddling around with all my screen share and stop screen share and so forth. Okay, and I'm going to just share this, again, the purpose of having a presentation, it's only 6 slides, all right? It's partly so you're not just looking at me, and partly just to give you some information that I'm not going to read to you. Obviously, everybody knows about this, about what happened at Akron, the loss of a very large number of faculty in violation of their union contract, and that violation of the contract has unfortunately been upheld in arbitration and I believe in the courts. And a term that you may have heard in regards to this is force majeure, just the fancy French clause for, act of God or unexpected and disastrous occurrence. And, you may have seen a story, if you're looking at this, that stated that there are only 2 schools in the state that have a force majeure clause, the other one being Bowling Green, which made us a little bit nervous. But what it turns out is that although we may be the only 2 schools that use the phrase force majeure, we are not the only 2 schools that have provisions that allow administration to cut all sorts of corners when there is some unforeseen or emergency circumstance. And of course, what the Akron example really shows is that these contracts may not protect us at all. The Akron union's understanding of their contract was that this clause would simply allow the administration to speed up proceedings, but that they would still follow seniority and other guidelines in deciding which faculty to let go. And in fact, what happened, if you listen to the people at Akron, they have referred to it as a hit list, that the faculty who were laid off without regard to rank or seniority were basically those who earned the most money and those who'd been labeled troublemakers because they had filed grievances. So, your self-preservation tactic here would be don't make too much money and don't file grievances, right? So we could go on about the Akron situation. Here at BGSU, looking back at all of this, it really is rather amazing to me. This is a quotation from a story in the press on May 15th. This is just 2 months after our university shut down for COVID. And in fact, it was only about 3 weeks following the shutdown that a number of our QRF colleagues, QRF is qualified rank faculty, and that is basically our second tier, I shouldn't call it that, but that is in effect what we have. We have a 2-class system of faculty, one group of which is basically teaching faculty, that's the QRF. They have no research expectations. And what I can say for Bowling Green is that procedures were followed. The people who received non-renewal letters were all people in this class of employees within the first 3 years of their contract. And that is in keeping with what our contract asked for. Now, fortunately, there was then another extension to this May 15th date. And ultimately, instead of 60 faculty colleagues, we lost only 17. But, you know, what's in the back of my mind, and I think all of our minds here at BGSU, is that we do have a restructuring ahead of us. And this is, you know, the initial cuts as a result of COVID losses. This is probably not the major story, and we don't know what the major story is going to be yet. So moving to Athens, this was Ohio University. This was on my radar before the link that Gabby sent me. They lost 53 instructors, and you know, no huge controversy there, but you know, and I'm not, this is the last one is Ohio Wesleyan. This news just came out fairly recently, and they have eliminated 18 majors. Now, again, it's really not shocking news. And at Ohio Wesleyan, this restructuring had been underway prior to COVID, and they're a small university that previously had 100 majors. So for them to eliminate 18 majors, it's really not a draconian cut. But I do note that German is in there. Middle Eastern Studies is in there, and I definitely agree with my Oberlin colleague that you know, that is not a forward-looking move to cut that program. And so the, you know, questions that I end up with, and like I said, on our campus, we know that a restructuring is coming. We have no idea what it's going to look like. And unfortunately, unlike at Oberlin, it appears that it may be top-down, as all of these other restructurings have been. I mean, I don't know in each situation the involvement of faculty, but clearly at Akron, faculty input was simply ignored, and even the contract was ignored. So these are my recommendations, but I have no special standing to make recommendations. You know, one recommendation would be unionize if you haven't done that. I mean, that may or may not really provide any protection, but it does at least get you to the table, right? As others have mentioned, make common cause with other languages and with ESL. We don't want to be in the game of don't cut us, cut French, right? We really need to be in it together. I think at BGSU, I've put down here defend or institute language requirements. We do still have a robust language requirement, both as an admissions requirement and within our College of Arts and Sciences, and that really does help support enrollments. In our situation, you know, many of our German programs do have funding, endowments. Sometimes it's for a German house. Sometimes in our case, we've got substantial funds dedicated to scholarships. Now, I don't know whether this really impresses administrators, because most of these funds have a clause, should the German program cease to exist, use it for another language, or, you know, use it for, but it seems to me it is at least some type of sign. And I will say that we have a very active group of Salzburg alumni, people who have been continuously asking, how can we support the program? And the message that we have given to them is just keep giving, you know, just keep making your donations, because, you know, money does talk to some extent. I think obviously also becoming integrated in other programs, and at BGSU, we're well integrated in international studies. As Gabby mentioned, I've directed the program. I still teach in the program. Christina Gunter has taught in the program. Honestly, in the back of my mind is, in the unfortunate event that German gets cut, is there someplace else you could teach? You know, I don't want to be dire, because what we would like to do is survive and thrive. But these connections, I think, are very important. As Edgar Landgraf mentioned, we have a European Studies program now, and all of these things, I think, demonstrate value. And something that I'm urging here, proposing innovative structures. We have been discussing for, goodness, probably 20 years now, some type of global studies center. And so in a restructuring effort, can we go to the table proactively and say, hey, you know, rather than being on the back heel and saying, oh, please, please don't cut us, saying, here's a great idea we have. We could take a leadership role. We're prepared to do that. And in fact, at our institution, there is it was active last year. I'm not sure what its status is now, but this proposal for a global studies center. So I will stop there, and I'm aware that we are over our planned time, and so maybe we can go into discussion at this point.
Thank you very much.
And I know that was short, but looking at the clock, yeah.
Yes, and we can pick up on some more points, and you'll have another opportunity to contribute other points if you wish. So thank you, excellent. With that being said, let's, applaud first. Thank you so much. So let's open up the discussion to our three presenters, including our three presenters, please. And discussion should include your comments as well as questions, as well as concerns you may have. Anything goes, really. Yes, Margaret.
Well, maybe I will just add, maybe I'll just add, since I originally had planned to talk about this, but Evan covered it quite well, the online teaching bit. You know, 10 years ago, I would have said it's impossible to teach languages online. I did say that in many meetings. And now the necessity of doing it, what BGSU has preferred to do, not necessarily for good pedagogical reasons, is that those of us who are teaching remotely have been encouraged to do so synchronously. So we are still, and in fact, it's really a mixed message that we've gotten from administration. On the one hand, they want us holding those scheduled class meetings. And I have the feeling that it's kind of a question of making sure that we're working, making sure that there's a perception of value being delivered. But on the other hand, they have encouraged us to be flexible, to maybe not require attendance. And so, you know, meet with them 3 times a week, don't make them come, is sort of the message that I have been given to deal with. And so what I have done with that, in all of my classes actually, both the culture class and the language classes, is that on Mondays I'm lecturing and recording that, and they can come live at that time and have the opportunity to ask questions in real time, or if they're working or whatever, they can watch the recording later, and that's honor system. Wednesday, we're having discussion, and that's where, Evan, for me, because we are teaching synchronously, that's where the language practice is happening, right? And on Monday, I generally give them a heads up. We will be doing X, Y, and Z on Wednesday, prepare for this. And Fridays, I have made optional. Sometimes it's individual meetings, and it's very interesting because it's again, it's an honor system, and you see which students are really dedicated. Sometimes it's a one-on-one, and those students who come, then they get the opportunity to really work in depth on something that they want to work on, whether it's their writing or conversation. And then we also have a Kaffeeklatsch running that I actually kept running all summer virtually. That has been really fun and interesting because now that it's online, We have people joining us from Austria. We have alumni logging in from other states, you know, people who are high school German teachers. And to me, this has been a win, you know, and there's so few wins in the time of COVID that I kind of want to celebrate that. So a very different approach to the online teaching than what Evan described.
Mm-hmm. Evan, did you wish to respond to that?
Yeah, I think my advanced level courses are also going a similar way. So where I have 2 days of synchronous content, we're covering Black German lives this semester. And so that's our Inhalt, and then Friday is a grammar / other. Yep, you want to be included? Okay, you be included. So you have grammar plus very relaxed topics, in which I then also reintegrate some of the course content differently. So I just organize it around sort of different frames for each class, so that's very distinct. If you're coming to the Friday class, you're going to have this sort of vibe or this kind of content, and that, you know, I've had students who've already had COVID, who've had family challenges. I have students who are homeless, so I you know, cannot expect the same thing. So I can do is say, anytime you attend a synchronous class, it will be of high quality, and or at least intense engagement with a small number of students.
Mm-hmm. Margaret Mary, you had held your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I have a question, but it's back to the topic I think all three speakers addressed in the beginning of their presentations. And thank you. This was really interesting. It's my first year doing this, so this is already a very worthwhile and fascinating view of what's happening outside of my little world. But my question is, I also was the chair of modern languages and literatures for a couple of years here at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. So 8 different languages all housed together at a STEM-heavy university. And the real challenge I had was that when faculty retire, get a tragic death to cancer, they're not being replaced, the tenure track, but we are hiring then adjunct faculty. We were using the term lecturer, which is in fact a yearly contract, renewable for 3 years. And in some ways, we had some excellent people take these positions who I thought, seeing the STEM side of campus, those candidates were so strong, they should have been getting like a postdoc somewhere, but we don't have postdocs in German, French, Japanese, Arabic. We have majors in these, but we don't have postdocs. And so I think we are part, I don't know if I can say this, we are part of the exploitation of excellent people getting PhDs. And I'm really worried about this. I'm impressed how many ABDs there are here, and I'd like them to have a future with, okay, so I also hear the administrators saying we have to be realistic. We have to understand we can't just keep doing the same old model, and we can't just throw our hands up, you know, and say, oh, I wish we had this. But so can we get something like a postdoc that's a better position? Or what are the other options for universities like mine that are contributing to going the wrong direction? And, you know, I wanted to look at it from an administrative point of view. I was really interested. So that's my question, actually, for all three of you.
You know, I could say something about administrative directions and what administrators are looking for. I think that you know, we're dealing with very different institutions here in some ways. I mean, we're trying to bring things together, but they are very different institutions. And what Elizabeth is talking about is a liberal arts college. Well, that's dedicated to the liberal arts. At Ohio State, you know, we don't have anyone. The provost is from the ag school, or what used to be called the ag school, and the president now is an engineer. Before that was from the medical professions. We don't have a kind of a liberal arts ethos that flows all the way through the institution. And then when you're talking about things like enrollment or overall enrollment, if you don't make your enrollment, Elizabeth, at your institution, you're in big trouble, because that's your main source of income. At Ohio State, we don't have that problem. We have many more applications than we have students that we can accept. And we, in fact, we had a record freshman class this year, much to the displeasure, I'm sure, of Bowling Green and Kent State and Miami and a lot of other institutions where these students would have gone, except they were accepted at Ohio State because we were hedging against the fact that we wouldn't have perhaps as many students returning because of COVID. So that's one of the way Ohio State screws the other universities, the other state universities.
Yeah, we did okay. We did okay this year.
Yeah, well, that's good.
I said we're doing okay for now.
That's good.
For now.
That's good. But what I'm saying is that these institutions have different problems. And if you're talking about Akron, Akron was mismanaged for many years, and that's one of the reasons that they're in such bad financial trouble. Now, what happens when an institution is mismanaged? The people who mismanaged it, the provost and the presidents from the past 10 or 20 years, they're not held accountable for it. They've probably retired already, and the people who get hit are the faculty members. So it's a very unusual situation in Akron, because I don't think any of the other state institutions have been mismanaged so badly as Akron was, and that's one of the reasons that they're in such bad shape. But let me just say one thing about what an administrator thinks. You have to take into account enrollments. So not only the overall enrollment, which you need to meet in order to get the revenue that you need in order to run the institution, but also which departments are contributing to in enrollment. So if you have a German department that is declining year after year in enrollment, it doesn't look good. And it's something where when the German department says we need another faculty member, you're going to say, well, your enrollment has declined severely over these years. That's the way I think almost every administrator would treat that. However, I think that there are also things called academic values. And what we have now, especially and almost across the United States, are many institutions that don't run with the academic values that I grew up with and that many of us cherish the most. And that's what the problem is. You have people who are running their institutions solely on the basis of numbers or solely on the basis of dollars and cents, or on budget models such as the budget model that we have, which counts only the number of people who are registered for the courses and are not thinking about things like the overall offerings of a college and the diversity of offerings that you need in order to have a really sound university. And the more administrators we have who have that business model in their mind, and the fewer who are cherishing academic values, the worse it's going to be for us, quite frankly. And I think that is, really the lesson for me. And unfortunately, I see more and more administrators being selected at universities who don't have these values. Now, that's where liberal arts institutions are more fortunate, because they almost have to select people who believe in a liberal arts education. So my plea here at Ohio State is, I was chairing for a couple of years, interim chair of the Near Eastern language and cultures. And there we offer Persian, and we offer Uzbek, and we offer Turkish, very low enrollment language courses. But if you're not going to offer them as a university like Ohio State, which is a flagship university, you're going to cheapen what that university is. Now, unfortunately, that argument that I think is very sound is not an argument that's always shared by the administrators at the institution that I'm at. And so that's where you're running into this. There isn't one set of values or what an administrator thinks. I think you have different types of administrators, some of whom think of have academic values, and some of whom don't, quite frankly.
Interesting. Yeah. Elizabeth, you had wanted to respond to Margaret's point.
I would love to, and I would also like to thank Bob for his very true and candid remarks. I know that unless we maintain our academic values, we will no longer be colleges and universities. And I believe one of the steps is to translate our academic values into terms that not only administrators understand, or we, if we come from faculty into administration, as many do, that we translate this so that we answer the questions that administrators have, but mostly answer the questions that students have. We have to recognize as well, students have choices.
Mm-hmm.
They could go to any number of institutions for higher education if they choose higher education at all. And
Mm-hmm.
they may be asking themselves, should I put this off for many years until things change again, until COVID is over? Should I go to college now? Where? For what? What will be the outcome? And if students are thinking in very concrete terms, they are also thinking about wanting to be their best selves, to grow, to make a difference in the world, to have an impact, to be able to answer some of our absolutely horrible social problems that need their intellect and their energy. And so if we have programs where we can say, yeah, this is why it's worth investing this many years to study the language that only a couple people are taking in that department at Ohio State. This is what you can do with that. This is the field you can connect with. This is perhaps an internship you can begin. These are people you will learn from and learn with. You might make a difference in that field. Students are talking about different things. They want to take their education and apply it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know in German, it's a longer route. We don't just read Zauberberg and just go apply it. We do think about it. We analyze it. We decide what we think about it, and we draw our actions after a lot of contemplation. But students who are entering college want to know, why should I read that? Why should I learn that language? Why should I spend this much time? So I think part of it is telling them why. And I think that is not an anathema. That is part of our obligation as educators. I also think the enrollment questions are very real. And it's true, Bob, we have very different kinds of institutions, and enrollments count in different ways, but we always have to be attentive to them.
Mm-hmm.
I continue to think we can transform the enrollments by asking students what it is they want to study and how German can connect with that. I think we also have graduate students who are earning outstanding PhDs at a place like Ohio State. Where will they work? If German at Oberlin doesn't do better to make sure there's a student body who needs their fine instruction, then there will not be a job for them at Oberlin. And so we are paying very, very close attention to that. As far as postdoc positions, I think this is one of the areas in which we can grow. We can start to learn how postdocs, the Mellon Foundation has changed its approaches to what it wants to fund and support. It wants to fund and support community engagement. And we could approach Mellon and talk about designing postdocs that could be housed in humanities departments, that could begin to bring people into the profession. Now, a postdoc position is a limited term position. Mm-hmm. And so after 2 great years in a postdoc, that person would like to have a next step. I think we need to be thinking down that line. And again, we're coming back to multiple perspectives, multiple ways of thinking about these issues.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So it's 11:30 now. Katra and I just communicated that it would be a good moment to take a quick break, quick coffee break, or whatever it is you'd like to do. And we reconvene at 11:36 and continue with our next set of speakers.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hallo.
Hallo.
Ich wollte nur kurz Hallo sagen, weil mir der Farbenkreis so gut gefallen hat.
Ach ja.
Ich will Sie nicht stören, aber ich habe in Deutschland einen sehr guten Freund, der richtig ernsthaft Kunst sammelt, und der hat in den 60er Jahren angefangen, als man sich noch russische Kunst leisten konnte.
Aha.
Deswegen ist es sehr spannend.
Ich habe auch schon immer gesammelt, aber wie gesagt, es hängt immer davon ab,
Ja,
was der Preis ist. Ne? Und die Preise natürlich, manchmal habe ich auch ein bisschen Glück gehabt, dass die Preise auch gestiegen sind. Und
wow.
dann kann man austauschen gegen
Ja.
ein neues Werk. Ne?
Sind Sie noch in Denison?
Nein,
Nicht mehr.
nein, ich bin Frührentnerin.
Gratuliere.
Nee, ich bin nicht mehr bei Denison.
Okay.
Mai war mein letztes,
Okay.
also Frühlingssemester war mein letztes Semester, und das Semester war völlig online.
Ja.
Also ich
Ah,
habe
okay.
dieses
Ja.
Programm geleitet für die 13 Colleges bei uns, GLCA. Und da habe ich das letzte Semester schon nur noch diese Kurse gemacht, also nicht mehr bei Denison
Okay.
auf dem Campus.
Aber
Genau.
Sie sind noch in Amerika, oder?
Ja, ich bin
Entschuldigung,
jetzt in
dass ich so
Indien.
direkt frage.
Nein, das ist schon
Wir
okay.
fahren vielleicht wirklich heute Nachmittag durch ich weiß immer nie, wie es heißt, Granville durch, weil wir ins Dawes Arboretum gehen wollen.
Ach, sehr schön,
Ja.
ja.
Okay.
Gut.
Na gut,
Okay.
dann viel Spaß, viel Glück und bis bald.
Dankeschön. Vielen Dank. Danke. So, sind alle wieder da? Ja, so ziemlich, ne? Gerade sehe ich, die Einzelnen kommen wieder hinzu. Ich schaue ich mal kurz hier. Auch alle da. Okay. Gut. Ja, dann würde ich sagen, wir machen weiter. Einverstanden? Kleinen Moment noch. Ich möchte kurz noch warten, bis Katra da ist. Kleinen Moment noch. So, ich beginne mal mit der Vorstellung. Ich weiß nicht, Katra ist vielleicht noch kurz beschäftigt. Okay, gut. So, I have to speak English. I keep forgetting. Once I switch to German, I don't even notice it, and I forget to switch back to English. Okay, which is strange, honestly, Bob. Next time, how about if we have one in German? Why do we do this in English? I'm sorry?
I said that's fine with me.
Okay, so, all right. So our first speaker will be Cynthia Porter from Denison University. Her talk is addressing racial injustice in the German classroom. And I will read Cynthia's introduction. It is very interesting, so I am not going to shorten it. Cynthia is a visiting instructor at Denison. She received her BA in German from Denison. And I think, Cynthia, if I remember correctly, we had a course together. 12, 13, 14 years ago, maybe. It was quite a while ago. Then followed by earning a master's in German studies from Bowling Green, as well as a master's in popular culture in 2015. She's also currently a doctoral candidate, earning a joint PhD in German and comparative media analysis and practice from Vanderbilt University. Her research interests investigate cross-media studies with a focus on the body in German literature and film, the topic of the grotesque body, body modification, the presentation of German history and heritage in American film, and Afro-German studies. Her dissertation explores how the practice of tattooing participated in systems of identity formation in the wake of moments of perceived cultural rupture and transition in German 20th and 21st century history. Very interesting. Okay, Cynthia, you need to unmute, please. You're still muted. There you go.
All right, and I will be sharing my screen with all of you. And I will also endeavor to keep an eye on time as well. All right, so my presentation is going to be a bit of a mixture of a little bit of script reading, but also just free speaking to express or to communicate some of my own experiences since shifting into the teacher position at Denison in January of this year. So first, I would like to take a moment to thank our moderators, Drs. Bierman and Dillman, for helping initiate this conversation today, and also for the workshop, or to the workshop organizers as a whole, for offering both me and us this space to have these discussions. Again, I'll be sharing my own experiences and considerations during the social unrest that we've seen so far this year, and how I engaged in those conversations with my students. So I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar or were aware of the scholar strike that took place earlier this year, actually earlier this semester. And I just want to provide a bit of a background and a bit of context around the facilitators, one of whom really initiated was Dr. Anthea Butler from the University of Pennsylvania. In addition, I'm working with Dr. Kevin Gannon, who works at Grandview University. When it comes to the intentions of the strike, it was to ask both faculty and staff in higher education to participate in a nationwide traditional strike over the 8th and 9th of September, or if that was not possible, or if they felt like that approach did not resonate with their particular style or what have you, to instead tune into the teach-ins that were made available through an organized YouTube channel, or to engage in teach-ins that they facilitated on their own. And this latter option is what I opted for with my own approach. So my participation in the scholar strike, again, was to offer 2 teach-ins that were both voluntary for all of my students. So I'm teaching 3 courses this semester, and the teaching approach is a high flex model where we meet in person twice a week and we meet remotely twice a week. And so I offer 2 one-hour sessions with students of both days, and fortunately, both of those days fell on remote days during the week anyway, so that was wonderful. In terms of streamline, it didn't really interrupt our normal programming, as it were. I also provided, or I offered, our normal class or our normal lessons for those days anyway, so this was just kind of an add-on opportunity for students. 10 students were in attendance, and at least 5 watched the recorded sessions at another time. I have roughly, I think I have 38 students this semester, so engagement was pretty high, which was, of course, a nice, not necessarily a surprise, but it was just nice to see student engagement. Also, those that were in the discussions, their participation was very high. It was really more not only me being the facilitator, me sort of communicating and educating them and so on, but also really trying to focus on conversation and seeing how my students were feeling. I also received multiple emails leading up to this. So I told my students the week prior about my intentions. I asked them for their availability, and I had received at least 5 emails from students just saying how much they were looking forward to the conversation, talking about time conflicts, trying to figure out what we could do in order to make these sessions accessible to them, which is what led to recording them, of course, with the permission of the students that were present. I wanted to go over how I organized these conversations. So I first started off with a check-in, and I feel like we are doing that a lot this semester and also last semester, just to see how our students are feeling, just trying to make sure that they see that there's open lines of communication and tapping into their emotional availability for these conversations. And of course, I'm also trying to reflect on my own packaging. I was very conscious of the fact that they are engaging in a conversation with a woman who identifies as being a member of the African American community, and how that could potentially impact the level of engagement that they feel comfortable bringing to the table in these conversations. So I kind of spent some time not only checking in with them, but also giving them this disclaimer, thanking them for their participation, and also trying to encourage them or remind them, like, this is a safe space. We're here to be respectful to one another. We're not here to try to make anybody feel guilty or what have you. Just designating time, focusing on these conversations that were indeed impacting the way my students were able to focus, just their ability to sleep, their ability to feel like engaging in higher education was worth the effort when there are other things happening socially that they felt was difficult to order in terms of the hierarchy of where their energy should be directed. So really kind of reaffirming the fact that those feelings and those considerations are valid, but also that that's experienced across the board, not only on their side, but also showing that us as educators are experiencing the same thing. So I gave some background to the scholar strikes, as I did briefly here, and also my engagement and my approach, my interpretation, because in my own opinion, when it comes to issues of social unrest, particularly that are racially oriented or around racial tensions, engaging in conversation is really where I feel like my energy should be directed, rather than cutting myself off, or if I were to engage in like a traditional striking sort of thing. And also communicating to them the strike was not against one's institution. It wasn't like I was striking against Denison or anything like that. It was just really a moment of solidarity and expressing support as representatives of higher education to these issues. And I believe across the nation, there were over 5,000 participants in the strike. And then there was also a Canadian strike that happened 2 days, the following 2 days. So really showing the students that this was an international consideration. I also shared some of my firsthand experiences, sharing my background in participating in Black Lives Matter protests abroad in Berlin, and they're also reflecting on how my feelings and my concerns about protesting in an American context are fundamentally different than my feelings towards protesting abroad, just in terms of my own comfort, in terms of police-civilian relations, stuff like that. So really showing that this is a conversation, and it is applicable to German studies, because these conversations are happening within a German context as well. So really showing them that there is bridging between second or third language learning, right, foreign language learning, and the conversations and social tensions that are happening in an American context. And then I sort of shared some information, so my content and education, and then we finish with discussion. So the topics that were discussed over the course of 2 days were actually quite broad. And both of our sessions ran over a little bit. Like they were about an hour, like they were planned for an hour, but they ended up being like an hour and 15 minutes. So we discussed the simultaneous exploitation and demonization of Blackness. So talking about doctors Jessica Krug, and in addition to Rachel Dolezal, talking about the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement this past summer, engaging in articles covering the protests in German media, so looking at sources like Deutsche Welle, Tagesschau, Berliner Morgenpost, and so on, to really show like, also give them examples in the target language of things that they could be engaging with, in addition to anti-racism initiatives that are currently in the process and also have already sort of hit the ground running on Denison's campus to try to bring it full circle. And we also discussed the unrealistic expectations of police, just how they have to wear multiple hats, so they get stretched pretty thin, needing to not only serve as law enforcement, but also engage in mental health or social work, just things that they are not necessarily trained to do, but are expected to do, and how that strains law enforcement as a whole, but also strains communities as a whole. And these are things that our students were also observing on their own, and this was also part of a check-in, just to see how their perceptions of police are today. And also discussing how we've already started to see shifting in how policing is approached. So for example, Denver, Colorado adopting sending out social workers instead of police officers for certain situations, stuff like that. So how we're already seeing shifts in these conversations. And we discussed comparing American policing to German policing. So here's a graphic that I shared with them from the Prisoner Police Initiative from the Western Massachusetts, comparing annually the number of civilian deaths at the hands of police in the United States compared to other countries. You see the US just shy of 1,100 in a year compared to the 11 in Germany, and therefore kind of going into or supplementing some of the like, I guess, the challenges of trying to fit in a lot of information in a 1 hour thing. Be like, all right, this is like a snapshot. If you want to compare the two, right, in order to make it applicable in our classrooms and these discussions. And we also talked about incarceration rates and just how complicated that conversation is. And particularly in an American context, I guess. And checking in with how students feel about some of these topics, but also giving room to educate ourselves, myself included, in some of these topics. The takeaways for me was, in a way, it just reaffirmed the importance of faculty-student relationships when it comes to topics of social unrest, and particularly in terms of racial tensions. Students really appreciated the opportunity to discuss these topics. International students in particular found these conversations to be insightful, not only between me and the students, right, but also between the international students and American students, and learning those perspectives or changing perspectives. And that was, I call it like a bonus conversation that I didn't necessarily anticipate going in. And it really made me feel good that we allocated this time for these conversations. It also contributed to a sense of community, not only within each individual class. So again, I'm teaching an intro, an intermediate, and an advanced level this semester. So not only in those individual courses, but also across all three. So really engaging or letting students engage in a sense of community of German language learners as a whole, right? And so they're engaging in conversation with each other through Kaffee Klatsch and stuff. It's not that they don't see each other. It's that the opportunities are just a little bit more limited. And so this was an additional opportunity to bring those students together in conversation. It also confirmed that students can discuss active social politics that fall outside the confines of language learning with their instructors, because I felt like there was a bit of hesitance as I was sort of showing them or giving them my own disclaimer, like I want you all to know this is a safe space and so on. And at the same time, kind of confirming that, like, yeah, in class we are learning German, we're learning grammar. Sorry, my dog is not happy about not being in here. And also showing them that, yeah, we aren't just totally divorcing things that are happening on a national level and not bringing them in conversation here. Like, there is connection. And I feel like that is challenging for us, or that's conversations that I've experienced as being challenging, how to make ourselves and make our conversations and make our classes more accessible, or trying to draw students in or trying to make them relevant. These are conversations that keep coming up. And I feel like really dedicating time to engage in these connections is something that is beneficial in the long run. I also, there have been recent conversations around the subjects of racial inequality and under the confines or under the category of German studies. So on the 14th of this month, there was the Black Lives Matter in German History seminar. And here you see a list of participants or people on that panel. There's also a recording available. I can send that in the chat. But one of my main takeaways of that experience was the conversation around integrating conversations of race into classes that are already well established. So instead of dedicating a whole class to, let's say, like Afro-Germans, which is something that I'm currently working on a syllabus for next semester. But instead of that approach, which is nice in terms of designating space for that, but also just weaving in conversations of different demographics, of different races, of different perspectives in the classes we already have established. And also there's through the DAFA Film Library of UMass Amherst, there's a virtual film festival currently underway. So there's like 2 sessions, I'd say, of the 19th through the 22nd, where you're viewing a film virtually on your own, and then there's a Q&A where we all meet together. And so the films for the first segment, we're looking at Audre Lorde, the Berlin years, 1984 to 1992, in addition to Maya Yim, Hope in My Heart. And that conversation was also very, very interesting, because we got to talk to the producers and the directors and people that were actually present in those documentaries. And when it comes to discussing racial injustice in the classroom, like I was saying, that could be kind of challenging for the lower levels. Might be a little bit more streamlined for the intermediate and advanced level classes. For intermediate, we're talking about things like social media, interactions with media, emotions, expressing one's opinion, stuff like that, more topic focused. And I feel like that those conversations present opportunities to bring up conversations that are happening socially or nationally, internationally, like talking about video recording the police, live streaming things to Facebook, like how we disseminate information, stuff like that. So there are more clear connections there. In addition to the upper level classes, this semester I'm teaching a class on body modification in German-speaking Europe, the history of it. And so when we're talking about World War II and the Holocaust, when we talk about Nazi experimentation, sterilization, history of eugenics, the fact that America has had a very active hand in these conversations from its very beginning, and how we continue to see footprints and things that are happening today, has really engaged and resonated with students and initiated conversations outside of what we're talking about just in class. And it really sort of solidifies, again, the relevance of these conversations, not only in our German classroom, but also just as people living in the United States, or for my international students, those that are engaging with American context and conversation and input all the time. Other avenues, again, like when it comes to classes that are already, I feel like are already canonized in German studies, include like 1945 to the present classes, looking at literature and poetry. Really this idea of decolonizing German studies can be embraced here, in addition to Afro-Germans. I appreciated Evan's comment about the Black German lives incorporation into his class, and also looking at German and Austrian music. I know that Dr. Kira Thurman has published extensively and it researches this topic very extensively at the University of Michigan and so on. So looking at time, I just want to thank you everybody. And I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, very nice. Okay, we'll have to move on. I would like to introduce Margaret Mary Daly. Well, I don't need to introduce her, you know her, but her talk is entitled Zoom in Small Enrollment Courses. And I will quickly give you her bio. Margaret is an associate professor of German and comparative literature, women's and gender studies. She studied at Stanford and Yale with research years in Berlin and Tübingen, research summers in Marbach, Göttingen and Paris. Originally from the East Coast, she has been in Cleveland at CWRU since Case Western since the mid-90s. She has published articles and chapters on poetry, epistolary writing, 18th century literature, gender studies, and is currently revising a manuscript for a book expected to be out in 2021. Great books by German women in the age of emotion, 1770 to 1820.
Okay, thank you. But today I'm going to talk about the teaching side of what I do, and I'm going to keep it very short because I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm really pleased to see so many people who are participating in this, and I want to repeat my thanks to the organizers What a great thing to do to get us together remotely, even though it's Ohio and we have that opportunity to get together. This was really wonderful that you kept doing it, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I've already learned a lot from my colleagues. So here's, and I won't screen share since I'm on a different machine than had my program, but I will keep it short. I have 5 basic takeaways for you for using Zoom successfully in small enrollment. And I chose small enrollment because that's what I do. I'm teaching 1 course this semester, and I have 4 students. I taught 2 courses last semester, and I had about 12 and 11. So it does drop off at the higher level. I'm teaching an advanced course. Actually at Case Western Reserve, so I've been there since 1994, the enrollment in German has not dropped off. It has never been high. When I started, I had 1 person in my 300 level course. So having 4 now doesn't indicate that in any way the enrollment has dropped. It's increased, but it's never going to be very high. So I'm used to this small enrollment, but I also talk to students and colleagues who are teaching about up to 22 students for these remarks. And I really do look forward to being challenged on them. Okay, so my basic takeaway for Zoom successfully is to liken it to gentle parenting. And I see a number of you who are probably far more familiar with gentle parenting and the movement and what that means than I am. I'm a grandmother. I have 2 adorable grandbabies, and I have 6 kids I've parented. And none of them got the benefits of gentle parenting. I think it was a whole lot more carrot and stick. So what gentle parenting is, for those who don't know, let me just get it very, very briefly. It's boundaries and empathy together. Boundaries and empathy. So there are rules and there are structures and there are exceptions. And this is my big approach to Zoom in the classroom. So I think you need a lot of things you set up and structure. So one is, okay, so my 5 takeaways. Number 1, use synchronous Zoom for instruction and asynchronous for assessment. And I know other people were talking about how to do this for the language stuff, but that's, okay, I put that out there as my number 1. Move on, talk about it if you wish. Number 2, recreate the in-person experience of a class by turning on your Zoom meeting 5 minutes before, and then you enter the Zoom room 2 minutes late. And tell the students you'll do this so that they know you're not there in the very beginning where they say, did you think this was hard or whatever, and they know when you're coming. And recreate that a little bit at the beginning. That's my advice, because at the end they want to ask you a question, but that allows them to have that in-person student experience. Number 3, use icebreakers and use them a lot. And they feel kind of clumsy, but I think with the Zoom and this distance learning that these are good things to do. And the other reason is because we did a lot of work in gender studies on trying to come up with pedagogical strategies that don't repeat systemic sexism. So if you say, okay, who can answer this? We repeatedly don't know that we're teaching to the first 2 people in the first 2 rows, who are the self-selected first 2 people in the first 2 rows. And so you have a kind of repetition of certain people who are more vocal, and those people will be privileged people, and we're not making changes. So if you use icebreakers, questions, especially ones that have a 1-word answer, and you make every single person answer it, you're already inviting everybody to the conversation. So, and they're best if it's a 1-word thing. You say, if you have a time machine, would you go forwards or backwards? And they only answer forward or backwards, and you don't let the students continue. You just get everybody in the conversation. And then even in the middle of the class, when you switch to a new topic, repeat the icebreaker. Okay, number 4, during those teaching of the synchronous sessions, use the chat for brainstorming questions that have multiple answers or slightly longer ones. It's really annoying as a teacher when you're the only person, because the chat is there and the people are here, and sometimes you have people in the classroom, people on Zoom, and then the chat, but it does keep students engaged. So when I ask, for example, students about the camera and the camera on and off, our university keeps saying, don't make them put the camera on. All of the students I talked to said, when I'm allowed to not put my camera on, I get distracted. I do other things. So in the range of the gentle parenting, I would say, encourage everybody to have the camera on, but tell them if they need to do something, mute the video, go do it, come back, turn it back on. Because you really do want them to be engaged during that period. And then again, using the chat, the other thing to remember is that it disappears. Unless you're using another program like Notability or something else to deal with it. Remember that if somebody does put some things in there, that's not always in there. It's not going to be in there later. And then the fifth one are the breakout rooms. And this was interesting because it was pretty divided. Some faculty say, oh no, they're no good. Some students said they're a waste of time. Other students said they were really great. Other faculty said they were really great. So thinking about it, again, this very mixed use of it. My suggestions for successful Zoom, use the breakout rooms, but make sure that you get it back into whatever material that was worked on in that breakout room comes back into the main class. So don't just break them out and tell them, like, discuss this for 5 minutes. Have the groups presented again. And so these are, again, not new pedagogies, but since they're not there in the room, a number of students confess when they're not asked to do that, they just go on their phone. So they're like, oh, we're in a breakout room, time to do social media on the phone. And they don't really want that. These are adult students. I'm talking about people in their 20s, but they're also like us. You turn off your camera, you're likely to do that. So that would be it. Those are my 5 takeaways, right? Synchronous Zoom for instruction. Turn on the camera and don't enter the room too soon. Use the icebreakers repeatedly. Make sure you call on everybody to be inclusive. Be aware of the same dynamics of the chatty ones, the ones who don't participate. Use the chat room or other resources that you have if you're using these other programs. And do use breakout rooms, but bring it back. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you. Great tips for teaching with Zoom. So we will now open up the discussion, and the discussion will include all topics. Yeah. So if you have several points or questions, please perhaps start with our last 2. Make sure they get a chance to answer those, but then we will expand to all 5 discussion points today, presentations.
Yes,
Eva,
yeah. I have a question for Cynthia. Cynthia, you said that there is a fundamental difference between the way you approach the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States and in Germany, abroad. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So I go to Berlin almost every summer, pre-COVID, and I'm typically there for like a month and a half, anywhere between a month and a half and 3 months. And over the past 8 years, I feel like there's been a lot of Black Lives Matter, not only events that are happening or international events or events that are happening in the United States that are resonating internationally, but when it comes to protesting, engaging in protests across Berlin City, like at the Brandenburger Gate, stuff like that, understanding that the police are there to protect your right to protest, that are there to make sure that you're safe, and just the overall vibe and appreciation and respect for protesting, I feel like has a totally different tone abroad than it has here. And it doesn't matter, unfortunately, in an American context, when protests kind of go awry or you know, as you know, the tone of a certain organized situation can change at a flip of a switch, where you might feel a little less comfortable, or you may not feel like the message of the protest is something that resonates with you the whole time you're there. I feel like that's more likely. It seems like protesting is a little bit less stable in an American context than it is abroad, or at least in my experiences abroad. And so that being the case, and of course that leads to potential domino effect, right? If it kind of gets out of hand, or if people are starting to get more agitated, what is going to be the agitation that is met, right? What is going to be the retaliation in response to that? And that's not something that, number one, I feel like should be a concern, but unfortunately it is. And secondly, it's just something that I've not experienced abroad. I don't feel like going to protest or going to be a peaceful participant in these conversations could be potentially met with aggression, could be potentially spun by the media as being like, this whole movement is oppressive, this whole movement is aggressive, this whole movement is violent. When we know that Black Lives Matter movements in the United States, 97% have been peaceful, but that's not what you hear in our media. And I feel like things like that are not, they're not concerns that I have, or they're not things that kind of deter me from protesting or participating in these conversations of social unrest when I'm abroad. And I feel like that's very important to share with students as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. That was very interesting.
Matthew? Oh, I mistook your.
No, sorry.
All righty. Sorry about that.
I do actually. So, I mean, this is an idle thought for Cynthia again. I'm wondering if you had these conversations in German, if you found that helped students speak more honestly. Does that make sense? That I feel like there's a certain amount of like Verfremdung when one's speaking a foreign language, and how that can play into having these sorts of conversations besides looking at the cross-cultural component.
Right. And you're asking me specifically if I engage in these conversations in the target language, like in the classroom, or if I engage if we discuss in English?
Yeah. So what language did you use, and did you see any advantage to using German? Or do you think that would become difficult?
I would say that in my upper level classes or class, when we discuss these topics, they're always in conversation to other things that we're already discussing, or things that we've read, or videos that we've engaged with for class that day. So in that class hour, it is in the target language. When it came to the teach-ins, like those are taught in English. When it comes to when class is over, students will want to continue to have the conversation with me, but they don't feel as though they have the Wortschatz, right? They don't have the vocabulary to express some of these feelings. So it tends to shift to English after that hour is over, right? As soon as we get to 12:30, just because of their comfort, right? Because I feel like they already feel vulnerable to express some of their thoughts or trying to be diplomatic or what have you. And so they tend to feel a bit more confident expressing their feelings in English. That just tends to be what I've observed so far.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Edgar? I got you, Helen. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask, because I'm coming back to the structural problems we discussed earlier, if you don't mind, and the kind of looming and lower enrollments that we're facing. And one way that we've been discussing, at least, countering this was through curricular changes. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about the kind of two options that we've been debating. I was in the curricular committee last year, and solicit feedback in essence. But we had kind of two ideas in the end that we were trying to work out. One was a world perspective majors, which I think is a global studies majors, kind of lowering a little bit the, that is, we would add a major that lowers the language requirements, but also allows and invites for more cooperation between the different languages. We've recently merged into World Language Department. And we thought, I think my sense is we just have a group of students that really are interested in what we're doing, but might not really ever be able or willing or ambitious enough to get their proficiency in the target language to the level that we expect for traditional majors. And so to add a major that, again, would not just offer a German film course, but a European film course, etc., that would be broader, involve different languages, and not require as much proficiency in one particular language. We have two problems with that. Let me say that right away too. It would compete a little bit with the international studies major. And so we envisioned this, what we ended up calling a world perspective major, to be more humanities centered, whereas international studies major, at least at BGSU, is more kind of a social science, political science has more of a political science focus. And then the other, so that was kind of one proposal that we've been presenting as the committee to the department already. There was some resistance, I think, especially from French, just kind of a retrenchment, defending, a fear of such a major being added, cannibalizing the traditional majors, which I don't agree with, but that was a fear that some were quite outspoken about. And the other idea was just to have, and we've seen this too, the examples of that, and some of you might have that actually, to have rather than have a major in German, a major in Russian, a major in French, to have a major in world languages with a specialization in German. And again, I think our idea was it would, and I'm not sure if that's true, provide a bit of institutional protection, because now we have all the different languages, we count our majors together. Spanish will help us, is one of the beliefs here. But also it would allow to, and we've been working on this, add courses, introductory courses, for example, about foreign language learning, film courses again, or other interdisciplinary courses, intercultural communication courses, where the particular language would not be the focus, but language learning or intercultural learning. And again, thus, both have courses for well-enrolled courses for faculty who teach the lesser taught and lesser enrolled, lower enrolled courses, but also encourage collaboration between faculty from different languages. So I just wanted to put this on the table. It's COVID kind of interrupted our discussions. Ask what do you have experience with these kind of two options or alternatives? Or what are your thoughts about that?
We have Helen next, and then Katra.
So yeah, you can hear me, right? Thank you. Cynthia, I also want to talk to you. Thank you so much. And I just want to say, from what you described about the courses you teach and how you're incorporating the material of the Black Lives Matter into them, I wish you could do it at every one of our colleges and universities. Mm-hmm. I think it's wonderful. But what occurred to me while you were talking is, it sounds like things are pretty sometimes dangerous here in this country, but they're so great over in Europe or in Germany. These demonstrations, right? They're not as. Do you incorporate what happened in the first half of the 20th century in, say, Germany? I mean, maybe you don't have time in these initial courses, but I'm wondering if you ever bring that up. In other words, there was a lot that went on after 1945 to kind of clean up the German landscape in terms of this, and do you do that? But maybe you can't, you don't have time, so that's fine. I just was interested.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Thank you for that. It is more challenging to fit that in the intermediate level, where these conversations Sure. kind of just sort of like bubbles in to be like, hey, look at how relevant. But in my upper level class right now, we are currently in this week and next week we're talking, and actually last week I dedicated more time to conversations around the Holocaust, conversations around eugenics and just like the history of that, shifting out of the 19th century into the 20th. So it's a bit of a longer history that I am able to kind of fold into class. And it is great to see that the students, number one, are engaging with this in multiple ways in terms of making the connections on their own, right? So of course they read articles, they're reading scholarly works, they're reading examples of cultural content and stuff in preparation, and then I'm allowing them to start the class by identifying connections on their own, and then I kind of give them my reading and I sort of build off of that. And it has been very rewarding to see students being able to make a lot of these connections on their own first, and also adding things that are like, for example, the Amazon Prime show, Man in the High Castle, like stuff like that, that I'm not necessarily as engaged, like I've seen like 3 episodes or something like that. But students that have other examples that they can kind of bring into class and engage with and connect with, and being like, these conversations are still relevant. We still see them actively sort of reinforced, or like when we talk about German tropes, stuff like that. So there is opportunities there, but it does require a bit of forethought and scheduling in time in that space to do that, which has been challenging, right? With hybrid approaches, and if people are purely remote and stuff like that. But that has been something that I'm more able to do with the upper level class than I am with the intermediate level.
Sure, I just want to say, because when I was listening at one point, I thought to myself, this is just like they come back and they talk about how wonderful public transportation is in Germany, you know. Anyway, thanks a lot. I understand.
Okay. Katra?
Thanks. This is actually more now in response to Edgar's comments and thinking again about the structural things. And I really appreciated Elizabeth's discussion at the beginning of thinking about cooperation and talking together about some of the ways forward that might involve working together across institutions as well, and thinking about that. We are just starting also a process of rethinking our curriculum, in part because it's been now between 5 and 10 years since we switched to semesters and reworked our curriculum. It was kind of time. And in part, again, because of this issue of lower enrollments in the upper division courses and being concerned about how to maintain those. And I think we're actually starting by asking students what they want out of the major and what parts they are finding most valuable. The difficulty, of course, is that the students that we can ask most easily are students who are continuing, and not the potential students who might not have continued, who haven't continued but might have if we were doing something else. So we're kind of trying to figure out, you know, how to get input from different kinds of students. But we want to start by asking them what they're looking for. And this is partly in response to Edgar, because I think all of the kinds of options you're discussing make a lot of sense. And on the other hand, our anecdotal experience and what we want to find out from our students who are doing the major is that many of the students who major, one of the things they most want is the language and the continuing use of the language and the language proficiency. And so the difficulty is that in moving to a model where the language is less a central part of it, that we're it's not so much that we're abandoning, you know, some outdated, to put it this way, model of what the major was about, but that we're also potentially leaving behind what the students really are looking to do and to be able to achieve at the end of the major. And if we still have the problem that we can't offer advanced courses in German, then that's still a problem in terms of rethinking the major. So and I don't know what we're going to find. As I said, we're in the process now of getting ready to ask students. But this is one difficulty I see in taking this collaborative route with other languages, which in philosophical terms I'm not against at all, necessarily. So, or I shouldn't say I do have reservations about it, but I'm open to. Just a thought.
Yeah, and that's obviously a concern we discussed too. And again, COVID, we had actually in the working, we had not finalized a survey that we wanted to run with first and second year language students. So, so my hope was, of course, not to, you know, cut short the ability of those who really want to focus on the language to do so. But in essence, by bolstering the numbers, make it, you know, more likely that we can continue to do so. And the kind of students that I would like to get are those that and I teach a lot this culture course, second year gen ed course, and I have students that are really interested in that, but the language is not their main focus, right? And I want them to take some language courses too, don't get me wrong. But I think if there was a major that, or even a minor that could add that focus less on the language and more on the culture and content and politics and what they're interested. That could just increase our numbers. And so it's a fine line not to cannibalize, again, the kind of traditional programs, and yet address this kind of student that is interested in what we're doing, the humanities perspective, but scared a little bit by the demands that reaching a certain level of proficiency in a foreign language present.
So you're talking about addition to rather than instead of?
Yes, that was
Got it.
definitely for our world perspectives major the idea, yes.
Got it.
It's 12:26, and I know we were going to go till 12:15 according to the program. We have two options. We can continue our discussion with those who are able to continue a little while longer, or we can stick to the plan. What is your sense here? Does anyone need to go badly? Shall we continue a few more minutes? Does anyone have, yes, you wish to continue? Nice, okay, very nice. Thank
you very much.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Thank you very much for your
Well,
contribution.
we already have had some people leave, so it's not that people haven't left at noon or at whenever they had to leave. So
yeah, that's true too. That's very true. So let's continue a bit then, and please feel free to leave when you need to leave. Shall we say we bring it to about 10 more minutes maybe? Would that be good for everyone? About, yeah, 10 more minutes? Okay, very good. Yes, Elizabeth, please.
Thank you both, Edgar and Cynthia, for really good presentations. Is Cynthia still here? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering about really impressing upon students what difference language makes, and I appreciated the question. You know, how do you have this conversation in German? Is it qualitatively different when you have it in English? Well, I appreciated Cynthia's response, because I would presume that it would make a big difference. And I wonder if that is a helpful conversation for Edgar, as you talk with others about a global studies major, maybe articulating the difference that a language makes in the pursuit of this major. And I'm curious, does this major provide for any kind of thematic focus on something like, you know, the BIPOC movements, the anti-racism? Could that be a focus? Could that program have a focus on global health, on the environment, on migration, and really elevate some of the complex questions and problems that demand solutions that a language-informed education can help to bring about?
I mean, that's actually one of the things that makes this idea so attractive to me personally too, because it allows for conceiving of different courses with different approaches. And we came up at some workshop we had internally with a list of courses that could be really interesting. One came up with migration, for example. Christina Gunther obviously is a specialist here, but it doesn't make sense to talk about migration just to Germany, right? This is an international project. So for me, it offers the potential to teach really interesting courses, primarily, of course, in English, because it should cater to different language majors, or in that major, people would still focus on a language. I see a lot of potential to bring our curriculum into the 21st century by adding such a major that is open to a much more, interdisciplinary and international course offerings.
Yes. Let's see. Anybody else wish to speak to that? Yes, please, Nicole.
This is not supposed to be a cop-out, but I actually wanted to encourage maybe some of the grad students to speak up on any question, but also the question that Katra was asking about what do students want, and you know, we are pretty much of a different generation, and I think it would be very helpful to hear from them. So no pressure, but it would be interesting.
Okay, yes, Bill, please.
So I would wonder, do you mean to ask us personally, or do you mean to ask us because we're in contact with, for instance, our beginning language students?
I was thinking more personally, really. I feel like it would be very helpful to hear, to hear from someone who is starting off and just seeing the whole profession in a different way, right? I think we all get put onto a certain track and certain approaches maybe, and you're maybe not quite so tracked yet as some of us might feel they are.
Well, I mean, I can certainly relate to the what Katra mentioned, the fact that as an undergrad, I was certainly interested in getting more language experience, but I don't think that's quite fair because I'm interested in any kind of language experience. So I don't know if I'm quite representative in that respect. However, I do know, like, for instance, so I did my undergrad at OSU. I do know that, for instance, the Japanese major, they only require 3 years and they can't get through all the grammar in those 3 years, at least according to how they have the program structured. And I think the Russian is almost the same way, where you just get to all the grammar, but like you don't entirely, you don't have the biggest control of the language, especially with Japanese. You could choose to do 3 years of the language, but you could also satisfy requirements by doing a 4th year of the language to finish out the major rather than culture courses. So, I mean, I think there's some kind of line to walk between those to make the thing flexible so that one could say, satisfy their interest in gaining the language requirement or gaining a more total language facility, and then having another way where one could focus in the culture. I don't know whether that would look like the 2 different specializations within a major, or just having some kind of option to satisfy requirements in that 4th year, just be more flexible. I'm not sure how it would look, but something like that is what comes to mind.
Thank you.
And Bill, since you mentioned whether we are, or whether Nicole is asking you from the perspective of you as a student, or you teaching students, undergraduate students, do you have a sense of what undergraduate students are looking for, the ones in your classes and the ones you are in contact with?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of really to restate what I've already mentioned in a certain respect, because there are the students who are really interested in the language, and I'm sure we've all had experience working with those students. They're the ones who come to our optional, Friday class, or they're the ones who stay after for office hours and ask you, obscure minutia about the grammar afterward, right? But then there, of course, there are the students who are, they're not majoring in German, they're not majoring in something, that. Then again, I don't know, I've had a lot of students who are in some really hard STEM courses who just are fascinated by everything, who stick around as well. But I think there are also some who, have to do the language requirement as well. So, it depends. I don't know. It seems like we need to have something to get them interested. And I say that certainly the grammar doesn't draw them in, the particulars of the language per se don't exactly draw them in all the time.
Thank you so much. Anybody else wish to? Am I missing someone? Oh yes, Cassie, please. Cassie.
I was just going to say, I feel like maybe a lot of us aren't responding because our personal feelings feel a little bit too anecdotal. At least for me, I've been out of undergrad for long enough now that I feel like I am of a different generation than the current undergraduate students.
That goes quickly.
Yeah. So I can say that in classes when I'm teaching, I notice a lot of excitement in talking about contemporary issues. And maybe this is another reason to seriously consider trying to integrate things like Black Lives Matter and migration into courses that are already popular or already stable. Students just get really excited about talking about things that they know and then connecting it to what they're learning. So, I mean, that's one thing. The other thing is, I think if you have classes of undergrads, this would actually be pretty easy to ask them about or to give them a survey. And then you'll get a lot more like kind of statistical feedback and less anecdotal evidence from us. And you'll see like, hey, what are you guys interested in? Is it popular topics? Is it the language? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good point, Cassie. Mm-hmm. Yes. Let's see. Am I missing someone? Let's go to page 2. Okay. All right. I think if everyone agrees with me and if nobody has any further comments or questions right now, Bob, did you want to say some final words or?
Well, I don't have much to say, except I'd like to thank everyone for participating and for coming, and apologize that we couldn't have it something that was more sociable this year. And I hope that we can do it next year so that we can have more intimate conversations with each other as we have in the past. And I'm looking forward to that, certainly. I want to thank you again, Gabrielle and Katra, for arranging the panel, and thank Natasha for her support as always. I don't think she's here any longer, but I wanted to thank her too. You're really the ones who put in the majority of work for this. So thank you to everyone, and have a pleasant rest of the day, and I'll look forward to seeing you in some form next year.
Yeah, me too.
And we will
Oh, there
send
she
you all
is.
information. We will send you all information about availability of the recording and of the chat transcript next week.
Hey.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Tschüss. Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye. Tschüss.
Tschüss.